Alright guys, in today's video I've got this lock that I'm having to change out on the garage, and I think it was worth taking you along to show you the disassembly. This is a Yale YH collection. This is specifically the Cambridge series, and I'm going to show you how to disassemble it. So here's the interior side, here's the exterior side. The reason we're replacing it is it no longer will release this unless you unlock it with the key. It's just worn out inside. So it's pretty obvious for most folks on how to get the shell or the knob off of the interior side, because you can see if we zoom in here, there's a little brass button. And all you have to do to get this off on the interior side is push this in and pull the shell off. And then you can take a flathead screwdriver, and typically on the bottom there will be a little notch like that. So you can wedge this in there and pry it off against the door. And you can get this cover or rose off. But the exterior side is not as obvious. It has the same kind of button, but that button won't do anything unless you have the key. You have to have the key inserted, and you have to turn it horizontally. So when it's mounted on the door, it's going to be like that. Right? And when you have it in that position, then it'll let you push this same little button in. And as you pull this off, you straighten this key back out so that you can remove it. And then we're going to pull this off the chassis, this housing piece. And why am I going so slow? Well, let me tell you that. I'm going kind of slow because the lock cylinder in here can sometimes come apart, right? So this is the cylinder itself, and underneath this little guy that's moving are 6 springs and 6 pins, and that's what sets what the key is based on the cuts that you have in the key. These little pins are pushed down by springs, and when you insert the key, if they're all the right depth, it'll let you turn the key, and if they're not, you won't be able to turn the key. And just briefly to show you what that looks like, so this guy can sometimes come off and let these things out. That's why I pulled it out very slowly. But on each end, this little piece of metal is bent down to retain it. So if I take a flathead screwdriver and I just get it underneath this little piece of metal and I bend it up, just like that. A little bit more of that actually. Like that. And then I can slowly pull this back, and I'm not going to take all these out because I'm not showing a depinning video here, just a disassembly video. But now I can take out the spring, and then there will be a little pin in here. We can coax him out. Come on. There he is. Right, so that's what the pin looks like. And there's going to be 6 of them in this design, and they're going to be different lengths. And that's what corresponds to the cuts in the key. I'll show you some technical information on this in a little bit on what those different pins look like. So I'm just going to push that spring back down. This is the old lock, but just showing you what it looks like. Make sure you don't get the spring caught up on this little tab piece. And then we're just going to bend it back down. Just get it all the way in so it grasps onto this brass piece so it doesn't come off. So you could transfer this intact from the old lock to the new one if you wanted to keep the key, or you could take this piece off I just showed you, this retainer, and you could transfer the springs and the pins to the new cylinder if you wanted to have it keyed the same, or you could even just, if you had enough of them, use the new pins and code it for your key. How do you put it back together? Well, to put it back together, if you were to slide this on, it's got this little tongue here that waves. And if we look down inside, There's this, in this particular model, there's like this green plastic in a slot. And this tongue's got to fit in that, while at the same time, this piece I just showed you with the springs and the pins has got to fit in there. But you can't get this back on with it in place, because even if I squeeze this down, it's not going to be enough to fit on here. And the reason is this guy kind of opens up when he's inside the shell. And so the easiest way I've found to reassemble these is we'll put it in here first, and then we'll grab our key, kind of push it back onto the key, and then pull the key out just a little bit, because we don't want it to turn. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to turn the key so that this top piece that you see moving, we can manipulate it around. Because to put it back together, what we're going to have to do is to get that slot to fit in here and get this little wavy tongue piece to fit down in the plastic. Right? So slide this back on to the chassis piece, because without that in there, it'll fit. And then we're going to try to get this lined up back in the slot. It can take a little bit of a dance sometimes to do. And sometimes, you know, so like there I had it almost in there. There it goes. Now I got to get the tongue to fit. Now I'm going to put the key all the way in to get that tongue to be happy. There we go. And now with the tongue in, I'm going to turn it back to that horizontal position. And now I've got it put back together. And similarly for the other side, it's a lot easier, right? You would take these two screws out. That would allow this to come off, and then the latch bolt would separate from the chassis. Put that back on after it's back in the door. This guy just goes back on, and then this guy just slides back in, just similar to the other way, except you just have to push it in. No tricks to it. And that's it. So I'll put some technical information on here on the different pins and the different models that this covers right after this clip. All right, guys, I said I was going to show you some technical information on this Yale YH collection. There's some of the different locks shown here, but the main thing I wanted to highlight is this particular Yale model is what's called KW1 compatible. It actually means quick set. And so that cylinder that I showed you earlier, what I've done is I've pulled this retainer off again, and I've removed the first 3 pins so I can show you some examples of what we were talking about. And if we go through this real quick, you know, there's a little parts explosion here that shows all the pieces that we disassembled, including this cylinder. This piece here gives you an idea about this KW1 quickset type key specification, and it talks about the depth of the cuts on the key and how that corresponds to different pins. We're going to talk here about just bottom pins. Master pins would be where you have a master key. Bottom pins is what most of the folks would encounter in a residential situation. And so if I look at the part numbers for these pins, I can see here these KW1 pins, they've got numbers 1 through 6, and they're all specific measurements from 0.172 to 0.287. And there's an example drawing of a bottom pin. If we take a look at these 3 that we pulled out from those first 3 positions, we can see there's 3 of the 6 sizes represented here. Right? There's a very small one, there's an intermediate one, and then there's a larger one. And the way something like this would work, so here we've got this, these 3 are empty. If I put the key in there, without any pins, it's going to turn, right? And based on the cut depth, these pins are going to be able to drop through this cylinder housing and rotate, right? That's how the lock works. And so if for some reason you lose these, or they come out like I was mentioning before, and you don't know, let's say these 3 fell out and you don't know how they go. Well, if I put this longer one in here, that one really doesn't make much sense towards the end here. It'd make more sense, you know, out further out. But if I put it in here just as an example, right, I can't turn the key now because it's too big. But if I put this very small one in there, right, that's the correct size for this position, and so now it turns. And so very similarly, again, if I put this larger one in the second hole, it's going to end up being too big and I won't be able to rotate it, right? The key won't turn. So I have to get the correct size. As it turns out, it's the very smallest one in the first position and then the intermediate one in the second position, and then this larger one came out of the third position on this particular lock. And in that orientation, right, now the key turns. So it can be a process of trial and error if these fall out, but that's how you can figure out how they go. But you can use some kind of educated guesses from looking at the key and thinking about this picture I showed earlier and how those cuts might correspond to the different depths of the pins, right? So that'll give you an idea to eliminate some of the options. So anyway, I hope all this information helps you out on how to either move this lock cylinder from your old lock to your new lock, or take it apart and take the new pins and springs and transfer them over with the same key fitting, or if it comes apart, how you might figure out which of these cylinder holes that these pins went into and what size goes where. So if you found this useful, I appreciate you paying it forward and hitting that like button. If you got a question or comment, leave it below and I'll try to help. And as always, thanks for watching.